Hi, everybody. Welcome to La Lista, a Latinx writers podcast. I'm your host, Ruben Mendive, and today I have a very special guest, someone that reached out to me, and I love when people reach out to me. That's how I know. That's how you know who is hustling in this industry, who is trying to get their name out there. That is truly half the battle. So I like to have my guests introduce themselves. Sort of just a little bit about, who you are, how you identify.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I am Julia Camara. I am originally from Brazil. I've been in the U.S. for 20 years, but I was born and raised in São Paulo, Brazil. And I've been here, for 2 decades. I moved here to go to film school. I came São Paulo straight to L.A., and I've only ever lived in two cities in my entire life, which is rare, especially for Americans, right? Americans move around all the time. And I came here with the goal from the beginning to be in the film industry. And 20 years later, I'm still here. So I didn't always know that I wanted to be a writer. I just knew I wanted to make movies. And when I started film school 20 years ago, I didn't even know how movies were made. And the industry has changed so much, from going away from film to pretty much being all digital. But I had no idea. Like I didn't know editing was a thing when I started film school. I still remember going, "Oh, that's how they do it. Oh, okay." I thought maybe it was more like a play that was kind of shot live and edited in camera. I don't know. I had no clue. I just knew I wanted to do it because I had was a film lover from like very early childhood days. That in a nutshell, I was living in Brazil, and straight out of high school I was applying to colleges here. My backup plan was still potentially to go to college in Brazil, and then I ended up like not being accepted to like the two film schools that existed back then.
Mm-hmm.
So I had this moment of like, okay, I guess maybe I won't go to college because I got accepted nowhere. And there was that like 6 months of like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life now. I'm done with high school. I didn't get into film school. I didn't get into college, period. I don't know. I don't know what's next for me. And then I ended up actually getting accepted into a school here in the US, which I felt like, okay, there is such thing as failing up sometimes.
Yeah, you notice that a lot in this industry.
Right? I'm like, okay, all right. I guess that's a path I was meant to take.
Yeah.
And I have now a few like different Brazilian friends, and we kind of all share that who are also in the industry. We kind of all share a similar story of like, yeah, it didn't work out in Brazil, so here I am, type thing.
Yeah.
And
So can we talk about Brazil?
yes, let's talk about Brazil, the homeland, as my husband calls it.
I've never been to Brazil. I think my dad's been. So I don't really know a lot about Brazil. I know they speak Portuguese there.
Thank you for knowing that.
Yes. But yeah, like what was it like? Tell me about you. Tell me about your home life and your family in Brazil. Like, what was that like?
So I grew up very much middle class in Brazil. I, have an older brother. My parents got divorced very early, so I was pretty much raised, by my mom. I mean, I have a, pretty big extended family that I visit every time I go back to Brazil. And I just, had a pretty average childhood
Mm-hmm.
of a middle class kid in Sao Paulo, going to kind of the, average schools. And, it may sound weird, but I often feel like, Spielberg would also talk about how like his suburban upbringings like really created a lot of inspired a lot of the things he's created, and I feel like I kind of identify because it was pretty much that type of childhood, like
Mm-hmm.
just your kind of average I don't want to say sheltered, because I did grow up in a big city where there are a lot of different things happening. So it wasn't like growing up in like a suburban setting. It was a definite more urban setting, but not, no real. I don't know. It's hard to describe. I feel like maybe I haven't seen my type of childhood in a movie or TV show before,
Hmm.
because it's not like quite the sheltered, naive, like suburban lifestyle, but it's also not the gritty, like urban type of thing that we see in, a lot of programming. I'm like, I'm having an epiphany. Maybe I need to write something about my teenage years so that I can compare, like kind of portray what that looked like. But Sao Paulo is a big city. It
Hmm.
definitely has like more of a New York vibe than anything else. Like a lot of my Brazilian friends compare, like, oh yeah, living in Sao Paulo is like living in New York, and like living in Rio is more like living in LA. So
Hmm.
I kind of came, I kind of came to the wrong coast, maybe,
Yeah.
as far as like the like the active night lifestyle, and the active nightlife is what I meant. And just the overall like fast pace of São Paulo. I guess it's more of a New Yorker vibe than LA, where things are more laid back, and
Yeah. And what
we
did
go
your
to the
parents
beach a lot.
and what did your parents do?
My mom is in human resources. She's still working. She's actually now like a business coach, like a life coach type thing, but more geared toward more business, like business coaching and career enhancement. And my dad is he's an artist. He's a writer. He's a graphic designer. He's an illustrator, and he's written a couple of books, and he does a lot of um, graphic design and art, and he paints, and he's had a few art shows. So he's definitely the artist side of the family. And I can't
Mhm.
draw, sadly.
So growing up, like I always ask people this, who were they, in elementary school and high school? Like, what was the culture at the time, and were they pretending to be someone else? Like, what was sort of going on during those years?
I've always been really into, language and literature, and we would learn in Brazil. We would learn English as a second language, and I like was always getting good grades because I really enjoyed it.
Hmm.
And yeah, same thing with like anything having to do with reading and storytelling and all that stuff. And I like failed miserably at all the sciencey
Yeah.
stuff. Like I failed all the science classes, biology, chemistry, physics. That was not my thing at all. But yeah, I was definitely on the nerdy side. Like I did a lot of theater when I was little, and actually all throughout high school. Like I did theater and acting and all that stuff. And when I first moved to LA, I for a hot minute pursued acting. There are headshots of mine probably still floating around from 20 years ago, and quickly went, yeah, no, this isn't for me. Like this was fun, and I'm thankful that I had this as a kid, but I don't know. Yeah, I don't think I was ever meant to be an actress as a profession. But I was very thankful that that existed for me as an outlet, as
Hmm.
a way into the arts. Basically, I think especially film, it's like it's tricky, and growing up in the 90s, it's like it's not like nowadays where you can pick up your iPhone and make a movie. Like the technology wasn't quite there, so it wasn't accessible. But then acting and putting on a play, that was
Yeah.
accessible. So I'm very thankful that that existed. I'm also thankful that I realized early on that I was not meant to be an actress.
Yeah.
So I didn't spend years of my life pursuing that professionally. I think it's common for most artists to feel like they don't quite fit in, because I do remember feeling that way for most of like the high school years, where I'm like, I don't know where I fit in. Like I, of course had friends, and still have friends that I talk to this day when I go back and visit. but I think that feeling of like, yeah, I don't know, I don't fit in with any of these groups or these cliques, or like even my friends were also like doing theater and acting with me. I'm like, I don't know, like none of these people quite feel like my tribe. Like I will visit with all of them, but I don't know that this is quite where I belong.
Yeah. And how did you, and what was fueling that? How did you like see yourself, that made you feel like an outsider?
It's so hard to pinpoint because I feel like I still struggle with that to this day.
Yeah.
Of like, I still quite haven't found my tribe, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, someone was talking to me and saying once you
um,
feel like an outsider, you will always like identify as the outsider, even if you're not the person out, like there's just like, there's also like an identity with feeling like an outsider that you sort of
right,
continue to carry that. So then when you enter new situations, you automatically put on yourself, oh, I'm the outsider in the room. Like I have to try to fit
right.
in.
Right. Well, and in a lot of ways, I have now built my life, and that in a sense, I am an outsider. I am
Hmm.
literally a foreigner in this
Yeah.
country. So, yeah, it's almost like the self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm like, yes, I am, other. I am a minority now. I am different. I think, so much too of those young years of anyone's life is kind of figuring out who you are and trying on different identities to see what sticks. I think there's a lot of that too, and that's
Yeah.
why this feeling of like not quite fitting in is probably more common when you're young because you're trying to figure it out. It's like, I don't know, let's see if I can be this person, and then you go, yeah, no, I don't think that's who I am.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of just being a teenager is basically doing that, like trying to figure out who you are. And because now I do have two, I speak two languages. I have two very distinct communities in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
It all almost becomes like changing a clothes, just sort of changing your approach when you're with one group versus the other. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess we all have that, right? It's like
Yeah.
when
But
you're
it's like,
talking to other writers, you speak in a way, and when you're talking to your family, like you're kind of a different person. And
yeah.
I guess that's just part of existing. I don't think it's unique to me.
Yeah. And you said that, you were learning English in school. So I'm sort of interested in that, in the, English being taught in school, and like how aware were you of like the American culture?
Oh,
And
very.
yeah.
Yes, I was consuming so much American movies and TV shows, and yeah, very, very. I mean, it was one of the reasons why I really wanted to learn English,
Hmm.
is because I was just fascinated with film as a medium, and just you end up like really fully wanting to like understand all the nuances of all the dialogue, so then the subtitles start to not cut it, and I'm like, I really want to get what that means and what they're
Hmm.
saying. And then that turns into like really wanting to learn the language. I mean, I think now it might be a little bit different, but I know, like, yeah, in the 90s when I was in high school, um, English as a second language was one of those things that was taught, but it's almost like, how a lot of Americans like learn
Hmm.
Spanish here, but not really. Like,
Yeah.
it's not like they come out of high school really speaking Spanish. Although it's changing now, I feel like, right? Like, especially with the kids, like, I have a daughter, she's going to go into a Spanish immersion program, which I
Yeah.
find very exciting. Then she can maybe teach me Spanish when she's older. I'm very excited about that. Um, but I think back in the day, it wasn't necessarily that you would walk out of, a high school in Brazil
Hmm.
speaking English. But I also took a ton of like, extra classes because I really wanted to learn English. And I was obsessed with the TV show Friends. So
Hmm.
I would watch that religiously, and I would like practically memorize everything they were saying. I was so obsessed with that show. And I would go to like movies multiple times to the point where I'm like, I didn't even need the subtitles anymore. Like, I think I get what they're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And that all fed into me like wanting to learn more and more English so that I could move here, so that I could do
Mm-hmm.
what I'm doing now. But yeah, no, I was very aware of American culture, although it's still a bit of a shock when you get here and you're like, oh, okay. It's still not quite like, oh, yes, I am ready to go. No, there's still a lot of little nuanced things
Yeah.
that you go, yes, this is okay, this is different than what we do.
And so you talked a little bit about, sort of your college process and how you ended up coming to the US for school. Did you come on a student visa or?
I did, yes. I
Mm,
came on a student visa, yeah. Before 9/11, it was a different world.
yeah.
It was a completely different world. Like I've had different friends throughout the years that have come here on either student visas or tourist visas and tourist visas, and I see how much it has all changed
Hmm.
since. It's a
And
different world.
yeah, and sort of speaking to that, like, do you still visit Brazil? Do you have family visit you from Brazil? And sort of, how is that process? Do you see differences between the two?
Yeah, I go. So for the whole time I've been here, I usually try to go to Brazil at least once a year.
Hmm.
And especially now that I have my daughter, I try to take her also once a year. So
Hmm.
it's even more. I think there have been times when like 2 years went by and like I didn't get a chance to go to Brazil because of money or work or whatever was happening. But now, especially with her, I feel like it's really important for me to take her back. So she's traveled to Brazil quite a bit. She has a passport at the young age of 5. Like she's already a very well-traveled international,
Yeah.
preschooler, not even in kindergarten yet, and she's done a lot more than I had done at her age. But and then my mom visits me also at least once a year. So my grandmother used to also visit me all the time. They would come together. My
Hmm.
grandfather also. Yeah, there were times in my life when I would have like 3, 4 people here visiting me. Is As the years have gone by, now it's really mostly just my mom coming and going. Yeah, I go all the time, and the longer I stay here, the more I feel like when I go back to Brazil, I am now visiting like a foreign country where I speak the
Yeah.
language, because I feel like I'm so removed from the culture and the day to day, and it's strangely like familiar and foreign to me.
Hmm.
It's really trippy.
And so let's talk about the big move, moving from Brazil to the US. Like, what was that experience like? Because you're also going to school and learning how to do that, and then also, sort of trying to get used to a new country.
Yeah, it was. There was definitely a culture shock. Little things that I think in the first couple of months, it's like it's so exciting that you don't stop to think that you're not, that you're gonna have to adapt now. Is like this idea that in the beginning you really have no one, and then whatever friends you make in school, like they become so important because you really have no one else to like
Hmm.
fall back on if you need a favor, or if you just need, like, hey, I got a flat tire. Like and this was also a little bit before cell phones, like the early 2000s.
Hmm.
Way back when, before, like, if you had an emergency, you had to go find a payphone to call
Yeah.
someone. It is different. I think also, especially as a woman and being Brazilian, there was also a level of, and going to film school, which film school was more male dominated. So it was a different process of being in an environment where, there aren't that many women, and a lot of assumptions were made about like, oh, you're Brazilian, and if I had a dime for every time that I heard someone saying something like, "Oh, all Brazilian women are so hot," and I'm like, "This is not a compliment nor appropriate. I
Yeah,
just
that's
met
gross.
you." So I dealt with a lot of that, and especially in an environment where the majority of the kids were male.
Hmm.
So like, yes, I got asked out on a lot of dates, and I don't think I even fully understood what a date was at that point because it's a little bit different in Brazil, and I was only like 19, so it was that navigating that part was like a trippy. I'm like, I don't know, I don't know, the whole process was weird to me. And but from what I've heard now, like film schools are more gender wise, they're more 50-50. But back in the day, it was maybe 30% of the people in that school, maybe even less, were female. It was like you would be in one class where there were, out of 10 students, like two were women.
Hmm.
And like we kind of all knew each other. Like all the women in the film school knew each other on a first name basis because there was so little of us. And so that whole process was weird. And then hearing so many things that I feel like, especially now, in the post Me Too, post Times Up era, you would never hear that. But I heard it. I heard it on an internship. They're like, "Hey, you do realize that you're a woman, and it's going to be hard for you to do the things you want to do, right?" And I'm like, "What? Because I'm a woman? I didn't. What? What? Like it's okay for you to say this to me, like to my face? Like that's not what?"
Yeah, and it's also like either be part of the solution or get out of the way. Like, why are they telling you this? Like, it's no benefit to you. It's just another way to like push you down and make you feel small. That like the things you're trying to do are going to be hard for you. But it could have just as easily been like, oh, let me help you out. Let me connect you with this person. Like, really been like a helpful person. Instead, they just wanted to point out, your
Yeah.
differences.
Yeah, I mean, I still don't understand, yeah, why they felt the need to say that to me. To me it felt like, "Oh, yeah, you're basically already putting me down. Like I haven't done anything. I haven't even
Hmm.
tried it yet. Like this was my first internship." And I remember like I was so excited because it was inside the Warner Brothers lot, and that was like maybe my second day there, and that's what I heard, and I'm like, okay, I don't, why am I even doing this now? And I'm hoping the industry doesn't do this anymore, but there was a point where like a lot of these production companies would survive off of quote unquote interns, which was basically like unpaid labor.
Is
Because
that
like
still going on?
what I did was like I was a secretary. Like I was not interning in the sense that like, oh, you're learning. It's like, no, I was this dude's secretary. I was just taking, you know, answering phone calls, taking messages down, and fetching coffee. And I'm like, this is not an internship. Like I
Hmm.
wasn't learning anything. Oh, and the benefit that I got, it's like you get to read all these scripts. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I could have gone to the library to read scripts.
Hmm.
This was before you could read scripts online. Like it makes me sound super old, but it was a different world. Like in
Yeah.
the early 2000s, like everything was different. Like we couldn't just Google things and scripts would pop up. Or you would have to physically go to the library, or there were like a couple of stores in Hollywood where you could buy like a hard copy of a script of like a movie that had come out. Like, and I remember I did that often. And Samuel French still existed. And it's heartbreaking. It's gone. I just went off on so many tangents. I don't
Oh,
even know. I don't
no,
even know.
but
Like, how do I bring it back?
no, but that's a good point. Like, the industry still very much runs on unpaid labor through interns. And it's not like even like small production companies, but also like really big shows. Like,
I know, and it's one thing. Like, if you look at what the rules are for internships, it's like you are supposed to be learning. Like, it's supposed to be
hmm.
you're basically supposed to be shadowing someone to see how they do their job so that you learn how to do their job. You're not supposed to be like working for free, bringing people coffee and taking abuse, basically, which is
Yeah.
a lot of times is what ends up being. It's like you're not an unpaid secretary. You're supposed to be learning,
Hmm.
and that it is one of the things that like to this day, if I had any real power in this industry, I'd be fighting against because it is messed up the
Yeah.
amount of and I even back in the film school days, like I remember how a lot of the kids that like did well and survived in the industry were kids that had rich parents that could
Yeah.
afford to like not work for a year. I mean, they're working, they're just
For
not
free.
getting paid.
Yeah.
Yeah. And someone's paying their rent. And I think that still exists to this day, where it's
Mhm.
like only rich kids sometimes get to advance in this industry because they don't have to get a day job. Their parents are paying, their rent until they finally get promoted into a paying gig. And it's like, it is obscene and it really should not exist anymore. And if I had any power, I'd be fighting against that. But I'm still here trying to make ends
Yeah.
meet. So
Yeah, but that is like one of the things I try to get across on the podcast is, pay your interns. Like if you're listening to this and you have an intern working somewhere in your company, pay them. Like you are so limiting the amount of people. We talk about diversity and inclusion and making it easier for people to move up, but if they can't even get the starting position, then we're cutting out so many people that are just working class people trying to break in, and we're going to get the same stories from the same kind of people who could just afford it, because there's a huge racial disparity in our industry, but it's also based on class too. Like you can't ignore that.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that eventually, I think there was a buzz a couple of years ago about interns maybe suing the company, and I think Tribeca Films just fired all their interns because they didn't want to deal with it.
Ugh.
As a result, they weren't even being sued. They just heard about it and they fired all their interns.
Ugh.
And so I think that's another thing people are afraid of, like being retaliated against, because then you're cutting off for a lot of people the basic entry level job to get in. And hopefully, and again, we live in California, the labor laws are strong, but that's the Hollywood industry is a whole nother forest that you have to tackle to sort of change.
And I mean, there's so many of us that like want to be in this industry that we are with, and we know it's competitive, and we know that it's hard. So everyone is willing to like work for free to an extent, but then when it starts to go, well, if I keep working for free, I won't make my rent. And then you either have to get a day job or move out of Los Angeles altogether, because it is one of the most expensive cities to live in, but you have to be here to be in the film industry. I think that's where I actually saw a lot of my good film school friends like leave the industry. It's sadly, I have no statistics other than the people that I know, and every once in a while I think about all the people I went to school with and where they're at, and a lot of people, come not just from out of the country, but a lot of people come from out of state to be here. And then, they either can't get a steady job to pay their bills and they move out and they, move back to, their home states, or they go into a different industry where it's more stable and more, there's more reliant income. But because of that, I feel like the industry then takes advantage of those young starving kids who are like, this is my dream and I'll do anything. And then they put them in these jobs where really the jobs that should be paid. Because if you're not learning anything, and I'm like, if there's a young kid there listening, if you're doing like a quote unquote internship, but you don't feel like you're learning anything and you're just basically free labor for the company, get out.
Yeah.
Because a lot of these companies too, like they tell you like there's the promise of maybe being promoted into a real job, but they never do that. They just survive off of interns.
Yeah.
Like every few months they'll get a new one, and then they'll get a new one, and then they'll get a new one. And you learn nothing. Like if they at least are like have you sit into a meeting then, like I interned at a couple of production companies where like I answered phones, and I would sometimes kind of hear what they were doing, but it's like if they really want to foster you, like, in that case, like if I really wanted to become a development executive, which is mostly what they were doing, they really should have put me into the meetings, or like not just don't leave me to answer phones and occasionally read scripts and do coverage, which is another can of worms. Like, yes, read all these unsolicited scripts and do coverage in case one day we get sued. It's just, that whole Yeah. And then
Wow.
you get no guidance of like what type of coverage you're supposed to do. So I read a few scripts that I actually liked, and they're like, no, you're supposed to pass on all of these. And I'm like, but I'm telling you, I liked this one. No,
Yeah.
pass on everything. I'm like, oh, okay, well, then I don't understand what I'm doing here.
Yeah. And yeah, and it sucks because, for a lot of the paid entry jobs, you need like 2, 3 years experience, but you're supposed to fill those 2, 3 years with free labor that you're doing the whole time. And like that's just not a reality for some people.
I know, right? I mean, the the work that has gotten me through pretty much my entire career, which has been, has had its own ups and downs, but it's translation work. The fact that I'm
Mm.
bilingual has helped me because I've worked as a translator for many, many years for subtitling for TV and film.
Mhm.
And the thing about that too is that even decades ago when I started, like 17 years ago when I started as a translator, it used to be like full time in an office, and
Mhm.
then it shifted into you're just a contractor at the comfort of your own home
Mhm.
working, which is it's really great and it lends itself to you being able to do other things, but it has also become like you're always on call. They expect you to work
Mhm.
24/7, weekends, nights, which they used to expect that too, except in an office. But now that you
Yeah.
work from home, they don't have any overhead.
No.
They don't have to, pay to upkeep your computer or your electric bill or anything or your internet, and you just work all the time. You're always on call. So I don't know whether it's shifted in a positive way. I mean, that's true of any industry now. I feel like with
Yes.
technology, we're all expected to be on call 24/7.
Yeah, and it's a more of a gig contract economy now. We've moved from
Right?
like where people
Yeah.
were at a job for 20, 30, 40 years, where people will stay at a job for 1 or 2 years to sort of like build onto the next thing. But also for working class people, it's you're moving from one small gig to the next small gig to the next, not getting benefits the whole time, not getting any like 401k or retirement.
The film industry, so like the two industries I'm in, they're both unreliable, gig by gig, and like being a writer, and I've written mostly feature films at this point. I've written a couple of the TV pilots, but I haven't been a staff writer on a TV show. So I've really only done the feature films, and they've all been independent films, which in a lot of ways I feel like it's even harder to get it off the ground than like if I was working with a studio. You write something and then you hustle. Like how does this go anywhere, right? Like my first like actual produced credit. I got very lucky that a friend of mine referred me to this producer who was Brazilian, and he's like, oh, I was just like out to dinner with. He's actually friends with my husband, but we were out to dinner years ago, and he's like, oh, I need to introduce you to these Brazilian producers because you're Brazilian. And I'm like, yes, I am. And that ended up being like, it's like, almost like winning the lottery, like a 1 in a million chance that I met with these producers and they actually needed someone who was bilingual to write a script, and that became area Q. But it was like that 1 in a million chance, and at that point, so I moved here 1999. This was I think 2009 when this was happening. So like a whole 10 years of like, what am I doing here, working. Like I had finished film school at this point. I had worked as a PA a bunch on different things. I had taken writing classes at UCLA. I had taken the professional program, so like 2 years of that. And then I had written, I don't know, countless spec scripts. Like at that point, I think I had written like maybe 10 specs, feature length screenplays. I had submitted to pretty much anyone and everyone, like trying to get representation, and it is such frustrating process because, well, back in the day, we would also. I feel like I lived through all the changes. Like I remember mailing cold query letters like via snail mail, and then it started to change where you could get people's email addresses. So then you emailing query letters, and then I think there was even a couple of times where like I would pick up the Hollywood Creative Directory back when that existed, which was a thick book with all the production companies that existed. And I would just cold call people and try to see if I could get my script submitted. Nothing came of any of that. I did that for years. And then I would be like, all right, and I'm going to write a new script and I'm going to rewrite this script. And I did that for years. All while doing that, I was working as a translator, subtitle editor is what the job is called. And but it used to be a full-time job that like I had to go in an office and be there until all hours of the day and night. So every once in a while I would have time to, like usually on the weekends, or if I wanted to do all the cold calling, I would like take kind of a half a day and do that. But it took up so much time that if I felt like, I never had time to really focus on being a
Yeah.
writer. And I was doing a job that I'm like, this is not what I came out here to do. So it was this vicious cycle of like, okay, I don't know, I don't have time to like dedicate myself to writing. I get home and I'm exhausted because I'm
Yeah.
working like 16-hour days, and that's, I feel like that's always the dance, I think, of like when you're working and you're making money and you're paying all your bills, like you don't have time to do the
Yes.
thing that you really want to do.
Yeah.
And then when you're not working and all you have is time, you don't know how you're going to cover all
Yeah.
all
Yeah,
your
you're just
bills.
broke.
Yeah.
It's a catch-22, and I think that's something we don't talk about. Everyone's like, if you want to write, just write. You can always write. You can be after work on the weekends, but it's real for like working people when you're at a job that's draining the life out of you. You're working a ton of hours. When you get home, like you don't even have the space to think, let alone like and make dinner, let alone sit down and be like, okay, time to write. Like I'm going to be creative. I'm going to get in the mood for that because you're so drained that. And then you're right. When you do have the time, then you're like, okay, well then you're just completely filled with anxiety of how you're going to pay the bills, and that's also not doesn't lend itself to the creative process because at that point, writing is a luxury that you can't really afford to do.
Yeah, I think that's why for a lot of us who did not have, extremely wealthy parents, I think that's why it gets to be really hard, and I think that's why a lot of us like end up dropping out of the industry because it starts to feel like, I don't have the time to be creative. It's just a vicious cycle. It's like, yes,
Mhm.
when you're working, you don't have the time to do it. When you're not working, you don't have the headspace to do it because you're desperately trying to cover bills. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever had a time in my life where I'm like, I'm just going to take a full month and write a script and not have to worry about where
Yeah.
my bills are, where the money for my bills is coming from. Like, if anyone listening, if you have that, I envy you, and do
Yes.
it. Do it, like fully do it. Go lock yourself in like in a cabin in the woods, or you don't even need that, honestly. I feel like a lot of these like idyllic scenarios for writing are just BS. Like
Mm.
you can write anywhere. Like I often written like with the TV on in the background because I grew
Hmm.
up like with the TV in my bedroom and watching everything and anything. So I'm kind of used to like doing homework with the TV like just playing in the background. So I always feel like you don't really need to have fully quiet. Fully quiet for me is actually worse. Like
Mm.
I often write, I enjoy writing like in a coffee shop where there's noise and people
Hmm.
and other things to look at. I feel like that also helps me. Just a little bit of chaos, I think, helps me focus sometimes. Than if it's just dead quiet and perfect. But but yeah, it is so tricky, and I think one of the reasons why this industry is so you know white and male is because sadly that's who has the financial means to
Yeah.
take years off to work unpaid, or take a month off and work on a script.
Yeah.
And for the rest of us, it's like, all right, we'll just stay out here and hustle. And I also think like resilience is another quality, because like I said, it took me like a full 10 years of being in the US before I got anywhere,
Hmm.
before I got that first feature film gig. And I remember getting that, and and then the movie, we got very lucky too that I wrote the script. Like, I think I was talking to the producers in like early March, and in October they were shooting that movie, and it never comes together that quickly. So I remember like really feeling like, this is it. I have arrived. I will get lots of gigs after this. I will get an agent. Um, I have made it. It has been long, hard 10 years of like
Yeah.
working gigs and doing different things. And I've made it. And I'm like, I could not tell you, I was so wrong. I made it nowhere. I am very thankful to have had that job, but it took me nowhere. Like, I
Mm.
felt like once that was over, I was again starting from like square one. And this idea of like, oh, you are a credited writer now. Um, People want to hear from you, from what you're going to do next, and it's like, that does not exist.
Yeah.
Um, in a lot of ways, it's like, unless your first gig was $100 million studio picture,
Hmm.
no one cares. It's like, oh, so you made an independent film, you wrote an independent film, good for you. Next. I don't
Yeah.
like I don't I wasn't I noticed that like I wasn't taken any more seriously than I was like the year before when I had no credits.
Mm.
And that was incredibly frustrating and eye-opening in a lot of different ways. Um, so then, it took me a couple of years to get my second movie made, and it's all none of it was through the usual channels of like,
Hmm.
oh yeah, you get an agent and then your agent gets you a gig. It was more of like, I had then written another script. A friend of mine, I had written many other scripts in between Area Q,
Yeah.
which was that first credit. You can watch it on Amazon, by the way. The movie's called Area Q, stars Isaiah Washington. Um, and then in between that, I was writing specs, and I was hustling, and I was trying to meet people, and I was networking constantly, which is kind of what you have to do. And a friend of mine came to me and said, hey, so I met this producer. He needs a screenplay translated from English to Portuguese. My friend is also Brazilian. She's like, I don't have the time to do it. I don't really know how to even do the screenplay thing. It's like, it's a weird format for me. I'm not in the film industry. Do you want to do it? And I'm like, sure, I'll do it. I need the money.
Yeah.
And then I met this producer, and I just mentioned that I had also written a script, that I was, at that point, I was trying to fund it at like myself. Like, this was the beginning of, I think at this point, this was like 2011. So it was the beginning of crowdfunding. Like, it was still
Hmm.
kind of a new
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
So I was trying to go that route, and I was going to make this movie like ultra independently, and I had already had like a cast of actors that I knew and trusted and loved, and we basically got stumped. We, as my husband and I, we produce a lot of things together, and we kind of got stumped on like the budget for that. Like, we had a small budget, and we figured it out, and we're like, we can do this with the money that we have. And then when it came to like SAG and paying all the SAG fees, and there's a thing called a SAG bond, where you basically have to have the money to pay the actor. You have to have the money twice,
Hmm.
because you have to put all the money that the actors are going to make in a bond, and they do that to protect actors in independent films in case
Yeah.
we we leave town before the movie's over and we pay no one. But because we kind of had to have the actor payroll twice, and we didn't have that money, we had to like put the brakes on it, and we were trying to crowdfund. And that's when I met this producer. And I think because I had done so much work already to try and get this movie made, and I was thinking more like a producer, and I wasn't coming to him like, hey, I have a script that I would hope to see made into a movie. Like, I was already actively hustling to make it, and I was already thinking like a producer. He became interested, and then he read the script, and then the whole thing like took a different shape, and that movie ended up being Open Road with Andy Garcia, Camilla Bell, Juliette Lewis, but it ended up not being the no budget, no name actors project that I had in mind. It became like a pretty decent low budget film. But it was because I hustled in between like getting Area Q and then Open Road, and none of it was through like, oh, my agent. Yes, like I've never had an official agent. I've worked with managers now, and that's pretty much it. And then from that film came the kind of like right after that film was made, I had the inspiration of writing this other film called Occupants. And I met that producer through a service called Inktip. And when I tell people, they always go, oh, really? I didn't know Inktip worked. Like, I've seen the emails, but I didn't really know it worked for anyone. And I'm like, well, it worked for me, but only once. I have not had any other success with Inktip. It was just that one project. But it does work. So if anyone's out there and wants to try it, I'd say, hey, give it a shot. And that was another like low budget. That movie is unique in its sense because I wrote it wanting it to be easy to make. I wrote it thinking that I would like to have produced that, thinking that it's something that I could do easily with very few resources because it's basically just two people in a house. And I'm like, this would be so easy to shoot. Like, I wrote it thinking like, I'm going to shoot this. And then time passed, not a whole lot of time passed, but time passed. And at that point, my husband and I decided we were going to have a child. So I got pregnant. So then I wasn't like actively trying to make that movie myself anymore. And that's when I met, through Inktip, that's when I met this producer that then took the script, made the film. And I remember talking to him the first time and he's like, so I see that you also direct things. Are you attached to direct this movie? And at that point, I was 6 months pregnant, and I'm like, I'm not planning on directing anything. I'm only prepping for this baby right now. I'm doing nothing else. And that movie also came together very quickly, and it has because I think that by the time the first time I talked to the producer, I was 6 months pregnant. And then she was like 5 months old when that movie was like in production. So like all these things are fast. I'm only saying that because I then also have scripts that I've written like 10, 12 years ago that I'm still trying to get it made. And I've had like different producing partners and different people have been attached and nothing's happened. So that's why I mentioned that, like, in a year this movie was made. Like, that's record breaking for this industry. Yeah. Like, all writers have that script that they've been working on for 10, 12, 15 years. I have those too. And Occupants, we've been very fortunate that it's still, like, it came out in 2015, but it's still getting into festivals. It's still getting awards. The director, Russ Emanuel, he's been very good at like really pushing that film to get it out there, to get it submitted. You can also watch that on Amazon. Occupants with Robert Picardo. So check it out. It's a great little indie film. It's a true indie. It was made for no money. And it's a really cool film. And then the last film that I've made, shortly after Occupants, I'm like, all right, I have now written two scripts that I had intended on making it fully myself that have then gone on to be made by other people. So 2015 rolled around and I'm like, this is the year that I make my film. My film. So I came up with this concept of doing a fully improvised feature with no script because I wanted it to be more of a directing exercise than anything
Mhm.
else. So I got two actors that I trusted, and I basically told them, like, hey, this whole movie is going to be the two of you meeting at like an airport terminal, basically, and talking. So I don't want you to know anything about her. I don't want her to know anything about you. I'm going to give you backstory. I'm going to give her backstory. And I basically just want the two of you to come in and talk. Like, be in character and talk. And we'll see what happens.
Mhm.
And if it starts to veer off in directions that I didn't foresee, I'm going to, readjust and readdress the things that are happening. And I was fortunate that the actor said yes, and they did it. And so we shot the majority of this film in one day.
Mm.
And then I had other like days where we shot some extra scenes here and there, but like the meat of all this movie was shot in like a 12-hour day, pretty much. And the actors had never met before, and
Mhm.
they were even like, "This is so weird to get a call sheet, but not have a script to like
Yeah.
read and really think about." And like, I remember getting texts from the actors and going, "How do I prepare for this film? I don't know. Like, I don't know. What do I bring?" And I'm like, "Bring yourself. Bring the character." And I didn't even know if it was going to work, honestly. I'm like, I don't
Yeah.
know. I'm excited to do this, but I have no idea. I have no idea what's going to happen. Like, we could all get there. I could get there with my crew and my actors, and it could just be a hot mess. Because even
Yeah.
things like I didn't even know, like, how do I know if I'm hitting the right page count? And I'm like, I don't. I'm going by
Yeah.
minutes. How many minutes have we shot? And then, we kind of, in editing, I worked with a fantastic editor, and we sort of like shaped what the film really became, mostly in editing. But it was an experiment. It was like one of the best experiments that I think I've had in my life. And I like that, after so many years of being in this industry, I like that sometimes I get to think outside of the box a little bit and try something completely new and to me completely like unexpected. And I think, I mean, the film is called In Transit. Check it out on Amazon. We're going to be live on Amazon Prime June 1st, so check
Mhm.
it out. And it was extremely rewarding to make, and then it still took us, and again, when I say us, it's me and my husband, Tim Aldridge, who produces a lot of things with me. Like, we've done like a lot of short films together.
Mhm.
He reads all my scripts. He's always my go-to person for any project that I'm doing, whether or not he comes in as a partner. He's always my partner. And we then took like an extra couple of years to really finish post, because that's what I've learned. It's like, you may have the money to shoot, but you may not have the money to do post, and that's when you get screwed. So post took us a minute because we didn't have the money. We have a child. We work jobs. We try to do other
Yeah.
things. So it got really tricky, but we finally finished the film after like 3 years of post production. We released it last year. We premiered at the Glendale International Film Festival, which is a great film festival that has screened a lot of my films before.
Mhm.
And we've played a few more, and we may have a couple more screenings coming up. Like, even though we're already online, I still enjoy playing film festivals and having that like live audience watch the film.
Yeah.
It's always a great
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah.
But in the world that we live today, I feel like you have to be online
Mhm.
because it's hard to expect people to actually physically go to a theater anymore,
Mhm.
unless you're like the Avengers or something.
Yeah.
Like, don't go see that. But it's like, it's hard to drag you, like, your best friends to go see your indie film on a film festival.
Yeah.
So.
Is that funny?
It is. I mean, it's sad. But it's true. I get it. I love watching films at the comfort of my own home. I mean, I'm not
Yeah,
gonna lie. Like, I Netflix constantly. I get it. It's
yeah,
much easier than like putting on pants and, paying to
yeah,
park.
yeah. Cheaper for sure. So I do want to talk about your writing. Like, for all the writing you've done, things that you find are common in your scripts, the themes and messages and stories that you feel like you're keep trying to retell or figure out or express.
Right. So I have recently I was thinking back and I realized that there is a common theme between all four of my films so far is travel, which
Mm.
made me giggle. I'm like, yes, I mean my in a lot of ways my life is defined by this move from from Brazil to the U.S. So much of my life is about that, and I travel so much, and traveling for me always has more implications than just like, oh, let's go on a vacation. So that I've noticed that I'm like, that's kind of a common line between all four of my films. um, and a friend of mine then asked, like, well, what about Occupants, which is it's a sci-fi film and it's all in one location? And I'm like, well, there's a parallel universe aspect to Occupants, so I still consider that traveling,
Yeah, yeah,
even though it's not your like standard travel
yeah.
story. I still see it as an official travel situation. But I do see myself writing a lot of characters who are searching for something.
Mhm.
I think Open Road. There's that aspect of it too, of like looking for someone, looking for themselves in a way, like searching for their own identity or where they fit in. Wow, we're coming full circle now, and I didn't even plan on it. But yeah, I would definitely say maybe searching for like your place in the world is the common theme of a lot of the stories that I tell. Yeah, traveling, like physically traveling, but also looking for like where you fit in and where you belong.
I want to know how you feel about your immigrant identity, about your Latinx identity. How does how do you feel about that in the context of the United States, but also as a larger Latinx community? I want to know if you feel like there's a distinct difference between if there's been trouble trying to like find yourself within that identity.
Well, I have definitely. I think the fact that I don't speak Spanish, and I did mention my daughter is going to learn Spanish this year, so I do want to learn. But part of me feels like you've been here for 20 years. You had 20 years to learn Spanish. You haven't yet. It's been hard. I've been trying to work. I've been trying to break into this industry. I've been trying to do a lot of things.
But again, like people that do come from Spanish speaking countries also don't speak Spanish. So you
Right?
know,
I know, right? Yeah,
so,
people whose heritage is from Spanish speaking
yes,
countries. Sometimes, if they're born here, they don't necessarily speak the language.
yeah,
I do encounter that a lot of people still, we've had the World Cup and the Olympics in Brazil, but they still don't know that we speak Portuguese
hmm
in Brazil. If I had $1 for every time I have this conversation with someone, they're like, "Oh, you're Brazilian, so you speak Spanish?" And I go, "No." And they're like, "Oh, how come?" And I'm like, "Because we speak Portuguese in Brazil." And I'm like, "Yeah, it makes me a bit of a makes me a bit of a jerk to put people in that position, but I like doing it because I feel like they will now learn and they want to
yeah,
learn." It is, I'm very active in the WGA Latino Writers Committee,
Mhm.
and I often introduce myself. I'm like, I am the other kind of Latina because I don't speak Spanish, and I'm
Mhm.
from Brazil, and it is our culture is different from I mean all the
Yes,
cultures in South and Central America are different from each other,
yes,
but what all the other cultures have in common is the language, even
yeah,
though like if you go to Argentina, it's different than like
yes, it is.
Colombia, than Mexico. It's all different. Like they all
Yeah,
have their own nuanced language and culture and everything, and they get annoyed if you get it wrong. They really do. I get it. I get annoyed.
I get annoyed that people think like, oh, isn't it the same thing to be Brazilian or Mexican? And I'm like, no, no more that it's the same thing to be American or French. I do think that, I know I love and support like all the Latinx like writer, content creators, actors out there. It is difficult because like especially as a female, it's like there are so many. It's kind of the thing that I told you when I was in college. I would get a lot of like, ooh, Brazilians, they're all hot. And it is so hard to fight against that like stereotypical Latina, even I've even had friends that have said incredibly offensive things to me, like, oh, you're Latina, how many kids do you have? And this is back when like I had 0 children, and I'm like, I don't have any kids. And it's like, but all of you have so many kids, like where are all your kids? And little things like that are
Jesus.
just so awful.
Yeah.
Or like, whoa, they all start young in Brazil, right? You should be on your 5th child by now. And I'm like, well, not all of us. Some of us choose not to have children. It's not a rule. If anything, it's a stereotype. So it is difficult. We are often pigeonholed into a certain type of personality type, and and the whole sensuality aspect of being Latina is, it's just complicated because I feel like the media can't help but keep portraying women that way, in the community. And we, just like any other culture, we're way more than that one thing.
Yeah.
We come in all shapes and sizes and skin tones, and I feel like only now people are coming to terms with this idea that a woman can be Latina and of a different race, like you can be Afro-Latina, like that exists. I've tried to explain to people, I'm like, there are Black people in Brazil. It's not, it's not one or the other. And I've also tried to explain to people that like there's a large Japanese community in São Paulo where I grew up, and they're like, that's, I think the only person that has fully understood that conversation is Russ Emanuel. He's the director of Occupants, and he's Japanese American, and he's been to Japan, and he met in Japan a Brazilian guy who was of Japanese heritage, and he's like, Japanese Brazilian is a thing, but like meeting in Japan, it's a whole nuanced, complicated thing. But I think the media can do a better job at portraying all those little nuanced things that exist. You can be like multiple things at once, and your race, your skin tone, like that doesn't necessarily mean, it means different things if you grew up in a different country, but it's not one or the other. It's like not all of Brazil is samba and and soccer.
And that speaks to who's telling the stories.
Yes.
The media representation only is a product of the people in the room making the decisions and writing those characters.
Yes.
So you're not going to get a nuanced kind of, I think the media will so often fall on stereotypes because that's all they know about, the certain culture. They're like, well, that's what I've seen on TV, so that must be real. And the conversation stays the same. The representation stays the same. And our public perception stays the same.
I know, and that's not beneficial to anybody, because I feel like we're not seeing ourselves represented, and everyone else is not getting like an authentic experience of what it's like to be of this particular what it's like to be a member of this particular community or group, or but again, it almost goes back to that whole thing of like, hey, if you're a young writer and you don't have the money to work for free for a decade, you might drop out of the industry altogether, and then they'll never get to see your stories because you couldn't afford to, stay the course in this industry. So
and I think that's why it's so important Because writing is a gig economy. Everyone's just trying to get their next paycheck, make sure that their career is advancing, making sure that when you're so desperately trying to make sure that you're covered, you don't really are thinking to, oh, how can I help someone else out?
Yes, yes, yes,
So,
yes.
but what I think that's sort of changing now. It's people are coming together, people are looking out for each other, people are recommending each other, and networking and building community in the sense that, if we all do it together, then it'll be easier.
Yeah.
So I do
No,
want to talk about this WGA committee you're on. If you just sort of explain to people what it is, what it does.
Yes, yes. So the WGA has actually a couple of different committees within the.
Mm-hmm.
They used to be called the diversity department. I think they're now called like equity and inclusion. Like they've rebranded. But I've been a member of the WGA for a couple of years now. Couple is a figure of speech, I think, since 2014, if I'm not mistaken. But but since I joined, and it's like paying your dues, or it's literally expensive. It's a ton of cash you're giving to that guild. So from the beginning, I'm like, all right, if I'm going to actually invest in doing this and becoming a member of this guild, then I want to see what this guild's all about, and I want to see what the people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I immediately joined the Latino Writers Committee, which is a committee full of Latino writers. And the committee puts a lot of different events together, from like panels, so like informational events for us to learn and grow as professionals, from like events where we just really talk about the craft. Like we get people to come in and talk to us about like their process of creating. But the committee has also made a lot of efforts into like getting all of us out there, seen, recognized, and maybe even potentially hired. The committee has reached out to a number of different studios and networks, and we've been able to go in and talk to them about potentially creating Latino stories. It's like yeah, I think one of the first places we went to was HBO, where we had like a really nice conversation about the potentially developing Latino stories within HBO. I don't think they've had one yet.
Yeah, I can't think of any.
It is about time, HBO. Game of Thrones is over.
Yes.
Put on a show.
You have the money to spare now,
or pick up one day at a time. How about that?
Yeah.
Save that show. Come on, HBO, you can do it.
Yeah, it'll be a quarter of the budget of Game of Thrones, so
Right. It would be so cheap. It would be laughable. But the committee does a lot of work for us to get our names out there, and to remind the industry that we exist. And if you want to hear the authentic Latino perspective, all you have to do is come to us, because we are out here, we exist, we're working, and we want to work more.
Yes.
We want to keep working. And there is an audience. I mean, I know the few shows out there that have been, actually made it to the air, and movies and everything, have been successful. We exist. Like the audience for our material also exists. So it's not just a matter of like, hey, hire us because you should have more diversity in your slate. It's also because people want to watch these stories.
Yeah.
So the committee is amazing. There's just so much talent. It's incredibly humbling to be among like that caliber of talent. Honestly, everyone is out there hustling all the time. Like that's part of this industry too. Is that even when you do get to the point where you are working with agents and managers, you are still out there also hustling for yourself, like trying to meet people, trying to set up meetings, trying to get your own career going. Like as much as the gatekeepers can help us get a little bit further, it's like I feel like, if you don't want to hustle, this is not the business for you. as much as I have days when I wake up and I'm like, I just want to write. I don't want to have to do any of this work and figure out who wants to see this and how am I going to market this and who do I know? Who can I call? And what favors haven't I cashed in yet? Like, if you don't want to spend 80% of your time thinking like this, do not go into the film industry. So little of our time, I feel like, is spent actually writing. So much of it is like, oh, who's making stuff that's like this that I can call? And, where's my 6 degrees of separation of this company? If I don't have one, then yeah, that's when you go like, okay, then how do I get that 60 degrees of separation? And that's why having these committees is super helpful, because we often also share, this level of tips and like, this is who's doing what, and it's so important, to get to have that sense of community and this idea that we're like, we are all in this together. And sometimes too, like, especially as a feature writer, it's like it can be so isolating because it's just me writing, and and then you don't have anybody else to, like, a lot of writers have writing partners. I've written with people before, and I get a lot of feedback from my husband, but I don't have an official writing partner. So a lot of times it feels like it's all you, and you are an island. And, so if nothing else, it's good to get out there and talk to some peers every once in a while. So I'm incredibly grateful to have the community in the WGA, and I'm also very active in the Women Writers Committee. And there are a ton of others. There's the Asian Writers Committee. There's a Disability Writers Committee, Black Writers Committee. I'm trying to think of all the different committees within the diversity department. It's not called diversity anymore. It's called equity and inclusion. And that's one of the reasons too, where I contribute. I'm a contributing writer to the online publication Miss in the Biz, and I profile, and it's all about women in the film industry, and I profile female writers once a month. So I've done, I think I've been doing that for years. So I've done 12 profiles so far. Some amazing, talented women. You should read my column and hire all of those women for your next project. There's a lot of talent and a lot of different voices, and it's always a different trajectory for those of us who are not a white male. I feel like it's a completely different path of getting where you need to go, and finding space for your work. Because I even remember hearing from different people that, like, well, nobody wants to see a movie with a female protagonist. And I remember hearing a lot of that and then going, well, okay, should I then not be writing my material? Or should I convince you that, yes, people do want to see a movie with a female protagonist. Those people are called women.
And that's sort of why I started this podcast too, because I wanted to have different writers who have different identities, but also have different journeys in how they're becoming a writer, how they are writing, how they are trying to navigate the industry. A lot of times we just see the people at the top and we're like, oh, okay, but we don't know their story of how they got there, and we also don't know the people who are working to get there and what that looks like.
Yeah. And I also think that the time period when you're doing things also will change how you're doing things. I feel like too, if you're a baby writer right now and you're trying to get like that first gig, I don't know that my trajectory is necessarily the ideal one that you should follow. I don't know. There might be shortcuts that I didn't take.
but they know your story. They know the real story. It's because some people do want the tips and tricks, but also people just want someone else to relate to that they're like, oh, thank God, like somebody else is also experiencing this. They just want some validation in that what's the real story, because so often we're we're trying to do the perfect track, and that's not real life, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
So I did want to get to the segment where we start shouting out other writers that you admire, writers that peers you know about, people that I maybe should interview or that the listener should know about at home. So just shouting out some of your favorite people.
So Yvette Vargas, she's in our amazing committee of Latino writers. There's so many good people in that committee. Felicia Price is another writer that I profiled for the Miss in the Biz column. She's not a member of this committee, but she wrote Queen Sugar. She wrote a lot of like amazing things.
Yeah.
Maria Elena Rodriguez, she is also very active in both the Latino Writers Committee and the Women Writers Committee. She is, I was actually just talking to her last night. She's helped me tremendously. She just wrote, I'm developing this pilot. And she read my pilot, she gave me notes, and she's a tremendous resource for our community. Like, she is always willing to help, but please don't make her read your stuff. As I say this, I'm like, okay, now people are going to contact her and be like, please read my material. She don't do that to her. She's an incredibly talented writer. She's written a lot of TV. She's very, a very active member of our committee as well. But again, there are take a look at all the different women I've profiled on the Miss in the Biz column. Nikki Hawthorne is another talented TV writer. I only remember the more recent ones.
Yeah.
Linnell White, another amazing TV writer that I've profiled recently. Sabrina Almeida is another. She's actually she's the first Brazilian that I've profiled. Yeah, she's the first Brazilian that I actually got a chance to profile on this column. She's really good. Also TV. She has like an amazing life story. She was actually she was a professor for a number of years. She has a background in science. She is like a brainiac, almost to the point where I'm like, why are you writing TV?
Yeah.
You have like real science degrees. Like,
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the fun thing too about profiling all these women is seeing. It's pretty much what you're talking about. It's seeing all the different backgrounds and all the different life trajectories and everything that makes us unique and makes us so valuable to this industry. Like, no two of us, like I said, the first Brazilian woman that I've profiled, and she had such a different life trajectory than I had, where I'm like, it was basically from a little kid, I'm like, I want to be an artist. And she went into a whole science background before she came to this industry. So she has a lot more knowledge about a lot of different things than I do.
I want to ask, what should people look out for? Where can people find you? All your social media? Anything you want them to, in particular, take a look at?
So go watch In Transit on Amazon Prime. It's going to be free on Prime June 1st. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter. My handle is Julia MCA, which is my initials. I'm on Facebook too. I have like a fan page for all my writing there. I only post work stuff. I don't post any family stuff.
Yeah.
And my website is just my name. It's JuliaCamara.com. So JuliaCamara.com. And Camara is spelled with all A's. So I was actually talking to people about that yesterday. It's, even though it looks like Camara, there is an accent in Portuguese in the first A, so it should be pronounced Camara. All right, if you want the official Brazilian pronunciation, it's Camara.
The last part of the interview, I like to have the writers help title their episode. So it'll be your name and then the title. And the prompt is a blank Latinx writer. I do it so that people, when I post it with the title, people will look at it and think, oh, that's like me, I should listen to that, or or be like, oh, thank God, someone else is out there like me. Or if it's also to recruit more people, because if people see all these title episodes, they'll say, oh, they haven't had someone like me on, so I should reach out.
So many options. I mean, I do write like a lot of genre